Welcome to the RVA Small Business Show, your number one resource for business growth education, insights, and news. Let's get today's show started.
Welcome to the RVA Small Business Show exclusively on the RVA Small Business Network. I'm Joan Bowling, your host for today's shows. Rules, regulations, handbooks, compliance, exit interviews, they're all the fun things that business owners love to deal with, right? Although not the most glamorous part of running a business, having a strong HR foundation inside your organization can be the difference between a business that is positioned for growth and one that is unnecessarily bogged down with issues. Joining me in the studio today is Mindy Flanagan, founder and Chief Inspiration Officer with inspiringhr LLC, which she created as a human resource service that is simple, understandable, relevant, and empowering. Mindy, thank you for joining the show today. So glad to have you on.
Thank you. I was really looking forward to this.
HR. It's a huge topic, but most of us simplify it in terms of hiring and firing. What's in the muddy middle? Give us a little bit more fill-in for what it encompasses.
Well, you and I were just talking about airports, so what comes top of mind, and I talk about often, is infrastructure. And without infrastructure, you can have chaos. So, when you look at defining HR, everybody seems to define it differently, which is making it broader and broader and broader. And is payroll HR? No. Is benefits HR? No. But these are things that all need to play nice together in what we call the employee experience sandbox. And in the employee experience sandbox, you have to have set policies, practices, and procedures in order to really have some consistency in your workplace and tools that allow your frontline leaders to make good hiring, performance management, and sometimes firing decisions.
So it's all about managing employees from startup to through the life cycle in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I own a small and growing business. How do I know when I need HR?
It depends on your appetite or desire to have some set infrastructure. Now that I've gone through small business ownership myself, and I'm in, year 15 of it, and I have even fine-tuned my own craft of growing a small business, you get to this point where you think, I got to start writing some stuff down. Like we have to duplicate that. We have to replicate that. Or I'm uncertain because there might be a law I don't know about that affects my decision making. So you have to decide when you have an appetite to learn more and apply that to your business and set some good policies and practices in place. I'll use an employee handbook as an example. There's no law that says you have to have an employee handbook, but it is a hugely beneficial communication tool and risk minimizer in your workplace. So you have to decide, when am I ready for that? On the averages, I'd say once you hire more than 5 or 6 employees, you're doing HR. You just might not have it all written down quite yet. So then you have to figure out when you really want to document everything and start to build your infrastructure.
I remember when I was a part of a small growing business and we had about 6 or 7 employees, and I was chairing the task of creating an employee handbook. And we did it not well, and it took a whole lot of time.
You do that from scratch?
Yes.
Wow.
Right. And so is that usually the project that most businesses start with, and then they seek you out? They're like, this is too much. Do I have everything? And it's not a stagnant document either.
No.
Comment on that.
Well, and nothing in HR is stagnant to that point. And I just done a couple of talks on this lately where there are people yearning for an HR finish line, but there's no finish line for the business either, not really, unless you have a really clear exit plan spelled out in the next 12 to 18 months. So everything evolves and grows and matures and needs to be maintained. That's the case with a handbook or whatever other HR projects you're working on. But yes, 9 times out of 10, a handbook is usually where you start. And that's because it's really a central communication tool, expectation setting tool, roadmap for frontline leaders to make decisions, which is why we're so passionate about creating really personalized, up to what we call brand standard client employee handbooks, instead of just taking a vanilla template with a lot of legalese and just throwing it at people and then they don't understand it.
So you brought up brand standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just makes perfect sense that you have things that reflect on the company brand.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is HR. So talk a little bit about up to brand standard. What does that mean for a business owner?
I feel like we were maybe new to the table at talking about this because I spent a lot of time with marketing people and I invested in my own brand. And we are very much about personalized client relationships, personalized client experiences. I mean, it's often when you make an HR outsourcing decision of any kind, it comes down to, do you want a module or do you want a person? And I think you need both. Modules, or wherever we're headed with AI, there's things it's not going to be able to do. Like, tell me what your color codes are in your logo so that I can apply those in your employee handbook. So when you have a new or an existing employee, everything looks and feels the same, the way the company represents itself publicly and how it also represents itself internally to employees. It keeps everybody on the same page. So fonts, color codes, values that we say are important to us publicly, how are those applied internally in terms of creating rallying cries and a great place to work culture? All of this matters. And those are very personalized decisions per company. So we like to apply those to everything we create.
Is that one of the most common HR challenges? What are you seeing in the workplace today? Why clients are reaching out to you?
Distributed workforces. Remote work works, but when remote work really works and you have 20 employees in 10 states, and some of those states are named California and Colorado and New York, you don't know what you don't know until you open up that Pandora's box of, wait a minute, California requires me to do what? Colorado requires me to do what? That's completely contrary to my documented hiring process. Now what do I do? Or that's an additional add-on I wasn't anticipating. What do you recommend? So there's that layer that really exploded, particularly during COVID when everyone sort of embraced remote work, or even distributed workforces now. We're going to continue to be in a battle for talent for a long, long time. And if you think you can open up your talent pool by hiring remote workers in other states, I think that's fantastic. But you do have compliance obligations that will come with that and affect you in policy and practice.
So most people find out about those compliance obligations when they bump into, ouch, an issue. Is that usually how that goes?
What we try and help our clients avoid is the gotcha moment by the employee, right? I work in an industry where there might be an approach to selling the value of HR by fear selling into complying with labor laws. Look, labor laws are important, and I myself am a rule follower. But I also know that each leader and business owner, they have a right to decide how much risk they're willing to take on and what they need to know when they need to know it. My feeling on labor law compliance in particular is, yeah, I guess you could get randomly audited for being out of compliance. But the reality is your looming threat is a retaliatory ex-employee, or worse, the new employee that plays gotcha with the leader. Because when the new employee knows more than the leader does about laws that are supposed to be followed, you've sort of reduced your credibility as a leader for a period of time. And we really like to help our clients try and avoid that.
That's a really
Not overwhelm them with the details, but understand the basics of these and ask for help when the situation arises that they need to resolve.
And I think a lot of times then small business owners, in order to sort of save on cost, will do the search and see what they can come up with. But that's a never-ending hole or wealth of information.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be so overwhelming. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the cost factor that has to deal with hiring an HR professional, the value that it brings, and is it more reasonable than one might think?
I personally think it is. We'll use the example of going online with the Google search, right, to try and get an answer to something. Are you the business owner whose time is worth what, $150, $200 an hour? You can put yourself out on Google. Don't you want to delegate that out? And if you delegate it out internally, does the person internally even know what to be looking for to get the right information that they can depend on to make a sound decision? So you want to go down that rabbit hole. You may not be saving money if time is money. And if you really want an answer you can depend on, wouldn't you just rather pick up the phone and talk to a dedicated HR consultant for 5 minutes who can give you a definitive answer and everyone can move on? And that's really part of what we build into what we offer is we're the person, not the module. And yeah, you can add HR into your payroll experience or through a third-party administrators, but in many of those situations, it's self-service, it's a library, it's modules. You have to have some sort of underlying HR training to really understand what to look for and how to make decisions based on the information you've uncovered.
So that brings up two different points in what you're saying. One is fractional HR versus HR support partner. And you just brought that up as far as, yeah, here's a manual, go for it. But then again, which book do I pull out and how much time is my time worth to figure it out? Oh, then there's the interpretation of that as well.
That's right.
Which can be rather challenging.
Right.
So what your team offers then is the support, and not only for the chief information officer or CEO or president or what have you, but you have something called leader training, which is different than executive coaching.
So very different.
So share a little bit more about what the difference is, why that's important.
Well, what I spoke to earlier was, do the leaders know enough to be dangerous, so to speak, to spot the red flag and say, I need to call HR about this, right? Or I need help with this. And I am really happy that we are now living at a time, whether it's an executive leader or a frontline leader, less and less people are ashamed to ask for help. Less and less people are not ashamed to say, yeah, I know how to make widgets, or I know how to be a great accountant, and yes, I own this business, but I don't know HR. You know, you and I have worked during a period of time for which I don't want to admit to anybody I don't know something. I'm going to pretend I know everything. And that really hasn't worked well in a lot of workplaces. So we're living at this time where it's okay to ask for help. But how do you know when to ask for help? So we do this frontline leader training where we give them enough in terms of people management, HR, best practices, HR compliance, basics, that if they remember even just a part of it and build their muscle memory over a period of time, they'll get that kick in the gut that there's a red flag here and I need to open up the handbook and re-verify my suspicion on what to do. And if that doesn't answer my question, then I need an HR consultant or an HR support partner to ask, particularly when businesses have sort of put this office admin catch-all in place. Sometimes it's the executive assistant to the CEO. Sometimes it's the controller. Those poor people, you know, they do payroll and then all of a sudden they're expected to be an HR professional just because they do payroll. And so we partner with a lot of individuals like that in smaller entities where they really are the front lines, but they don't know what they don't know. And so they want a service partner to call to solve the complicated.
You know, HR really goes into the health of the company and the health of the employees as well. And nothing like being a small business owner, waking up at 3 a.m. with just those challenges of, did I do that? Did I file that? Do I need that? And knowing the next day they can pick up the phone, call you, call your team, and get the answers that they need and they want. So in turn then, how do people work with you? What do the service plans look like as far as when a business has reached a critical point? And do you get more people that have reached a critical point? And what is that? Are they in a crisis mode and you're fixing? Or is it a natural progression of, I need you're an extension of my business?
I'd say it's 50-50. I mean, sometimes we open up a conversation with, my benefits broker recommended you. They can't keep giving me free HR advice. They've drawn the line in the sand, but I need to fire this employee. Here's why, but they think there's danger in that. What say you? So we get a situation to deal with right out of the gate, and then they'll start asking some questions. We'll build up a conversation. We have that, get to know you dating period. And there's things that we can give them to really assess if this is the right time for them to consider HR support. Like we have our free HR checkup on our website. You can go through this free exercise and it'll ask you some basic questions just to give you an idea of, maybe I don't know what I need to know. And I've seen a lot of small business leaders who have bothered to put together a business plan year over year. They suddenly realize that when they take the HR checkup or talk to us, there were actually HR-related projects embedded in that business plan. They just couldn't spot them, but we can. And this is an element of what we call a lot of businesses do SWOT analysis, but we find ourselves, when invited to do so, doing these HR SWOT analysis. So they can then prioritize, what do I want to invest in year over year to improve the business and the culture.
And again, for you, your background, your whole career has been HR. You were in HR for 20 years before Inspiring HR was created. So you know what you needed to know then and what you do need to know. And your team is all about HR, all about helping the small business then achieve, thrive, grow in that just ever-changing climate that is the 21st century of HR. And critical because the world is small, as you said. We're still going to deal with a virtual environment. We're going to still deal with clients and personnel that are not necessarily in that office.
Yeah.
And so what do we need to know for state and federal levels, which is great.
Yeah. And that's just the compliance piece. I think what's fun for me is, I'm a small business owner with my own team members and my own internal HR to caretake for. And even what I'm deciding is right for our own culture now is not the same as it was 2 years ago. We're constantly innovating on improving the employee experience, even for our own consultants, because that translates over to them doing better service for our clients, and so everybody wins. So I do a lot of work in trying to connect the dots. But I understand the small business owner journey of some days it's exhausting. The speed at which things change, just keeping up with technology changes sometimes is exhausting. So that's where we sort of put a reality into our advice. Maybe you don't want to take that on now. This is kind of more a priority. You maybe could wait on those new job descriptions later in the year or next year. So we really work with small business owners and the people they delegate to be realistic in what we want to achieve during each 12-month term that a client is part of our client community.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for a great conversation today about the impact, the importance that HR has for small business growth. And what I see Inspiring HR doing so well is really helping companies scale with confidence through the maze that is HR. Thank you so much, Mindy, for being with us
Thank
today.
you for having me.
For more information on the services that Mindy and her team at Inspiring HR LLC provide, please visit them online at inspiringhr.com. This has been another episode of the RVA Small Business Show, RVA's only online streaming video network dedicated to small business growth, education trends, and news. I'm Joan Bowling, and I will see you next time.
This has been another episode of the RVA Small Business Show, presented by the RVA Small Business Network. Be sure to like, share, and join our newsletter at rvasbn.com.